So we are very fortunate to be joined by two friends of the show here for a little friendly discussion / maybe debate. We have Oren, who is senior economist for American Compass, and we also have Congressman Khanna of California. Great to see both of you. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Great to see you.
Thank you, Krystal.
Good to see you, Congressman.
Yeah, of course.
Great to be on with Oren. I always love debating or chatting with him.
Lovely. All right, Congressman, let me just start with you, just top line. What do you think of what the president's up to here?
This is the single most destructive act to the American economy and American wealth in modern times. I mean, you have to look at probably what Volcker did in the 1980s in terms of inducing a recession to have anything close. And there, Volcker actually had reasons because you had high inflation. Here you just have blanket tariffs, which are going to actually make it harder for manufacturers because it's going to drive up input costs and supply chain costs. You have no permanence. So if you're Mary Barra or Jim Farley, you can't even say, let's build factories here because Trump himself was saying, I don't know, maybe these will be gone in a month or 2 months or a year. They're not targeted and they're impacting allies as well as very poor countries. I mean, it is just economic illiteracy. What I would say is, you have the sort of total free market people who just think let everything be free markets. They're wrong. And then you have this kind of incoherent protectionism. They're wrong. And what we need is sort of smart industrial, smart tariff policy.
Mm-hmm. Oren, what are your thoughts on the specifics of what the president has imposed here?
Well, I guess I agree with some of that and disagree with some of it. I think big picture, the direction here in moving away from the unfettered globalization of the last generation is the right move. I actually think also that the sort of very blunt and broad tariffs, something like a 10% global tariff is a useful policy. I prefer to see us sort of change the rules of the game in that way than have government going product by product, sector by sector, and trying to figure out what to do in every case. But I do agree with the congressman that in terms of how some of this has been rolled out with some of the confusion, certainly the lack of permanence, I think we're sort of increasing the costs a lot further than they need to be, and we're probably not going to get all the benefits that we potentially could. And so, in my mind, I think the Volcker comparison is actually very interesting because, ultimately Volcker was addressing a very serious problem. There was pain involved. And I think we all look back at that very grateful that we had leaders who were willing to bite that bullet and that it was successful. And so I think that model can work. I think that kind of thing is needed here as well. But the specifics do matter. And I think there's a long way to go here on the specifics.
Yeah, I mean, sticking to the specifics and more, because we could debate rollout, but we should also debate vision about where things want to go. Something that Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary responsible for rolling much of this out, has said is to bring back manufacturing, even in terms of screwing the little screws. So let's take a listen to that, and we're going to get both of your reactions.
Great American workers. We are going to replace
on other
the
networks.
armies of millions of people. Well, remember, the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones. That kind of thing is going to come to America. It's going to be automated, and great Americans, the trade craft of America, is going to fix them, is going to work on them. They're going to be mechanics. There's going to be HVAC specialists. There's going to be electricians. The trade craft of America are high school educated Americans. The core to our workforce is going to have the greatest resurgence of jobs in the history of America to work on these high-tech factories, which are all coming to America. That's what's going to build our next generation of America.
Congressman, what is your reaction to that? Because you represent one of the most high-tech districts in the United States.
I was just a little bit sad. I had invite the Commerce Secretary to come out to my district. We could give him a free education. Screws are about 0.2% of an iPhone's cost. We may want to work on things like the display screen, or the flash drive, or the camera. I mean, it's almost like he's living in the 19th century. Of course, they've got 19th century policies on how to build an industrial base. I mean, you want to build high-tech factories here. What we need is financing. What we need is a government to say, if you build it, we'll buy it. That's how Silicon Valley started. What we need is investment in the workforce. So they're just going about this in a way that isn't how FDR or Hamilton or Lincoln built America. I mean, tariffs were a part of it, but it was a very discrete part of it. FDR actually, who did more to reindustrialize America than anyone in the modern age, actually opposed the high tariffs. He explicitly opposed the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and then opposed high tariffs, and had a vision for industrialization. So, this is just, I can't emphasize enough how much this is economic incoherence and how much Trump supporters are aghast at what's going on. I mean, the guy won because people thought he knew what he was doing with the economy and business, and he's destroying American wealth. He's destroying American factories. There are no new factories that are coming up because these things aren't permanent. He's increasing the input costs to factories. He's hurting small businesses. The Russell 2000 is collapsing, and I hope there's some intervention.
Oren, let me get. I want your response to that, but also some of the things Lutnick has been saying kind of get to this key question of what is even really the goal here, because people raise, okay, let's say you bring iPhone production to the U.S. The iPhones, because we have higher labor costs, and because, by the way, we don't have as large of a social safety net also as other countries, so businesses have to bear a lot of that cost in terms of what they're paying labor. Things are going to cost a lot more. And what Lutnick has been saying is, no, because it's really going to be robots doing this job, which raises the question of okay, so are we bringing back manufacturing for robots to fill the jobs, or is this about jobs? Is it about national security? In your ideal world, what is actually the goal here? Is it to have manufacturing capacity for robots to be screwing in tiny screws, or is it to have manufacturing capacity for human beings, some blend of the two? How do you see that particular dimension of this?
It's a great question. And I guess briefly, I just want to say I agree entirely with the congressman about his broader point about the other kinds of policy we need here too, whether it's the financing policy. I think workforce development is huge. That's not kind of like details of implementation. That's a big part of the strategy that I think we probably agree on to a significant extent. I strongly disagree with his reaction to the Commerce Secretary's comments, because I think it reflects what we've been seeing too much in this debate, which is an attempt to sort of take the worst possible and even obviously incorrect interpretation of what people are saying just to dunk on it rather than try to engage with it. Lutnick didn't say it was the screws that were a high value part of the iPhone and that's what he wanted people making. What he said was that he wanted to have the actual assembly process, which includes the screwing of the screws in the United States, that would be automated, and that the good jobs that he's talking about are the jobs actually operating the automated factories. And so, look, I'm happy to have a debate about whether that's right, but let's be clear on what he was actually saying, which is not nonsensical or incoherent. And I think it's actually
you're saying it much more sensically than he did. He didn't say let's have people be operating the advanced machines. He said let's have them doing the assembly of the screws. I just think he's out of touch. I don't know if he's ever been to Apple's campus or to Silicon Valley. I think he's got no clue about technology. I think these people are stuck in James Polk expansionism and McKinley's tariffs. And the saddest thing is they don't understand the modern economy. They're kind of clueless.
Right. Go ahead, Oren. You can respond to that.
Well, look, Lutnick was specifically saying, he was talking about the mechanics jobs maintaining the robots. This was, I'm happy to say that there's room for improvement on the communication here, but what he was talking about is highly automated, highly productive factories and the jobs that come along with those.
My guess is he probably wouldn't even be able to name the 5 top components of an iPhone. Like literally, I don't think the guy understands the modern economy. But
fine, I understand that part of your job is to
you have a much better way of communicating it.
I understand that part of your job is just to attack people on the other side, but I'm interested in what the actual substance of the policy is.
I'm attacking someone who's collapsed the American economy, who's gotten people who are going to get people laid off. Yeah, I'm going to attack him. He's done the most destruction of American wealth in the American economy we've seen for no reason.
Can I answer Krystal's question?
And he's incoherent.
Yeah, go ahead and answer the question. Then I have one.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because I think the vision point is very important here, and it's a key point to understand that what I think the Trump administration envisions. Certainly what I think is so important in focusing on this reindustrialization is not that you're somehow bringing back the same jobs of the 1950s doing the same kind of work. What you're talking about is actually rebuilding the industrial base and a strong industrial base in this country where we do actually have high quality, advanced, cutting edge manufacturing across a wide range of sectors, for one thing, it does provide a lot of good employment. And yes, there are many fewer jobs in those factories than there were in the factories of the 1950s. But you know what? There's a lot more jobs in those factories than there are in not having the factories. And so when you're talking about how you produce a broad-based renaissance in the industrial economy, you're talking about a lot of regions that have left behind that you don't bring back by putting everybody back in a factory, that you bring back by having highly productive, high-value factories. If we're sending a lot more advanced engineers to work in those factories, that would be great for those regions too. And so there's a lot of upside there. And Saagar, just to make one more quick point, I think the other thing that's key to recognize here is that the reason the industrial base is important is that you can't just pick and choose which things you want to be good at. We've tried to do that with our defense industrial base. We're just going to be good at the aircraft carriers and the submarines, and someone else can make everything else. And what we're seeing is that you can't just make those things. You can't just do the high-end stuff if you don't actually have the core industrial base underneath it. And so that's why I think the broad-based tariff model is right. We actually do need to have a capacity to really make, we're not going to be autarkic, we're not going to make everything for ourselves, but we do need to have an industrial economy that supports our prosperity.
One of the things that's at the heart of both of your arguments, we'll start with Oren, with you, Oren, and then to you, Congressman, because this is a bit of a challenge, is that you're both kind of talking more about quote-unquote high-tech manufacturing. But the way that this is sold, and ultimately was, Trump was elected on the backs of, was on working-class voters who don't necessarily have a 4-year college degree or, years of vocational training and engineering knowledge, et cetera. So in both of your cases in support of these policies, how do they actually help, the person in the bottom, let's say, quintile of the American economy and somebody who feels as if their job and their stable life was taken away from them? Because I haven't seen that in the vision that either of you are really saying. Oren, you can start.
Well, let's keep in mind that when you're talking about the bottom quintile, you're talking about people who don't even have a high school education a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so, to some extent, what you also want is even the sort of lower skilled, service jobs in a local economy. Whether those are good jobs depends on whether you have a strong manufacturing base. I actually love sending people to a wonderful video. The very libertarian Cato Institute did a video trying to show that free trade was good, and they highlighted a town that had been crushed by NAFTA, and then they showed it coming back 20 years later. And the way that it was coming back was with, guess what? A new manufacturing plant, making cars to sell in America. And so the examples of the jobs that created was not it was in the manufacturing plant for one thing, it was also at the pizza parlor in town, because you can have a good pizza parlor in a town that has a strong manufacturing plant. And so this is about a broader industrial ecosystem and a broader economy generally that actually spreads that spreads prosperity widely.
Yeah. Congressman, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I agree with a number of things that Oren has said. One is that if you have factories in a place, it has a multiplier effect, 3 to 4 times. So let's say you have a modern steel plant. Okay, you're not going to have 4,500 people because you have robots and automation. You have 1,000 people. In a town of 20, 30,000, that's still a lot. And if those are high-paying jobs, they're going to spend them on restaurants. They're going to spend them on daycare. They're going to spend them on a gym membership. And it can actually revitalize an economy. Now, to your point, Saagar, there's a difference between saying we want advanced manufacturing and we just want high-tech stuff. I agree with you. If it was just let's put semiconductor factories and battery plants everywhere, that is maybe not going to create a sufficient amount of jobs for the working and middle class. But if we're talking about advanced steel plants, if we're talking about advanced production in and of itself, that is going to create electrician, plumber jobs of machinists. And what we should do is make sure that every person in high school has an opportunity to have a trade, whether that's a vocational trade or a digital trade. And many of these advanced manufacturing facilities would create those jobs. Plus, they're going to spawn the service sector to have higher wages. But it needs more of an investment in the workforce, and it also needs, in my view, standards for wages.
Oren, let me get to you on this piece, which is something you've kind of alluded to. If we could put F4 up on the screen, because you've said, listen, you support tariffs in principle, but it has to be done the right way. And part of that, like a really critical part of that, the right way, is pairing it with industrial policy. And you can see here, we actually, not that it's been the end-all be-all, not that it's been enough, not that we don't need to do more, but we actually have had a policy over the past couple of years that has significantly increased U.S. manufacturing construction spending. And that has been, the Biden policy of a combination of protectionism and industrial policy through both the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So not only is this new tariff scheme completely unmoored from any sort of industrial policy, not only are we actually at a time when this administration is engaged in an austerity push that is going in the opposite direction of industrial policy, but they're also undermining these programs, which actually were working to increase the U.S. manufacturing base.
Well, I certainly agree with the strength of some of the industrial policy that we've seen in the last few years. I'm a very strong supporter of the CHIPS Act. And I think what you saw in that chart was a huge bump overall, driven almost entirely by a huge bump in those red bars, the electronics and manufacturing, where the CHIPS Act, look, we're spending a lot of public money. It's about $40 billion of public money, but that is generating hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in those specific chips factories. Then, as the Congressman was describing, in a broader ecosystem of other manufacturing and suppliers around them. That's a huge part of the picture. I think my support is for the idea that you don't want to only do that. And the reason is that what we'd start to look at is, okay, well, now every one of those bars that you want to increase, are we going to go, are we going to pass a law for every one, right? I mean, it took us 4 or 5 years to get the CHIPS Act up and running. There's an interesting effort now on shipbuilding, funny enough, the SHIPS Act. I think that's very promising too. But the idea that we're going to go through every industry and in every case figure out how to create a new bill, a new office to fund the investment in that, where there's something that is particularly high priority like chips absolutely is, I think the industrial policy push makes a lot of sense. But alongside that, accompanying it, I do think it's important to put a thumb on the scale for domestic manufacturing broadly and say that whoever's supplying those factories in other industries that aren't going to be politically sexy, we would like to see investment in domestic industry there too.
Congressman, on that chart, and you've had sort of a bipartisan consensus that has emerged that is a break from neoliberalism, and Trump gets some credit for that from his first term with his China tariffs. I think the Biden policy maintained most of those, expanded them, introduced the industrial policy piece. And one of the things that I'm fearful of is that Democrats will just be completely negatively polarized against all tariffs. And you already see some signs of this among the Democratic base. Representative DeLuzio, who's a member from Western Pennsylvania, put on a video that was like, hey, I have big problems with these tariffs. Tariffs in general, okay, maybe in the right place, but big problems with what Trump is doing. And he was viciously attacked online by a lot of liberal Democrats who say, how dare you even say that tariffs are good in any circumstance whatsoever? As you, someone who has, like myself, a more nuanced view on trade and sees the utility of tariffs in certain targeted instances, what are you hearing and feeling from your colleagues? Is that a concern that you share?
I think the attacks on Representative DeLuzio have been totally uncalled for. He's one of the most thoughtful people on this issue. I'd highly recommend his New York Times op-ed on tariffs, which he basically said, smart tariffs to protect critical industries against unfair trade practices and dumping are perfectly reasonable. What we don't want is blanket tariffs, and what we don't want is them done with no collaboration, because you have no idea whether they're going to be there a month, 2 months, 3 months, and there's no planning in terms of whether they're actually going to help create new factories. So I think the attacks on him have been unreasonable. And he's one of the most thoughtful members of Congress. In fact, he's leading this group I've been calling for economic patriotism, and he's been leading a group of economic patriots group that is very productive. I do want to say that I appreciated Oren's role in helping with the Chips and Science Act. Todd Young and I did that with, at the time, Senator Schumer. He's a much better legislator than he is in this moment in getting that through. And it's one of the things I'm proud of stuff. And he's right. From $30 billion, it's gone $400 billion of investment. All 5 semiconductor manufacturers, Intel, Micron, SK Hynix, Samsung, and TSMC are in the United States. No other country has that. And so we should be looking at efforts like that. The problem is Trump is basically Reaganism of tax breaks, deregulation, disguised as I want to build new factories, and basically he's added to that high blanket irrational tariffs. There's no strategy of building things. And in the 3 periods in American history, you look at Hamilton, you look at Lincoln, you look at FDR, how they did it. The large part of it was in federal investment and investment in our workforce.
My last question, Oren, this is a political and a coalition question for you. I'm a restrained person. I supported the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We also have to admit it was a disaster. The rollout, even if we support it on a policy level, it enabled, I would say, and I know the congressman will disagree with me, full-scale, funding of the war in Ukraine. It emboldened the neocons, and in my opinion, set our foreign policy in a much worse direction for a few years. Even though, at a basic level, I agreed, with the spirit of what was being done. Since you are involved in these coalitional fights, are you worried that a bad rollout here would embolden the Cato Institute, the Americans for Tax Reform, the Chamber of Commerce, and winning over the public's heart if this is not done correctly?
I don't worry so much about those sort of old right groups, which I just don't think are as relevant anymore as they used to be just across the board. I do worry a lot about the American people. Yeah. I do worry that if this is done poorly, if there are a lot of unnecessary costs imposed, if the point of the policy isn't communicated well, and then if you don't do the kinds of things that actually generate the benefits, then I think people will rightly look at it and say, well, that didn't work, and the broader principles have the potential to be discredited. So I do think getting this right is obviously incredibly important, and that's something that American Compass we're sort of ultimately focused on, right? We're very happy to kind of go to the mat defending these principles and the direction, and at the exact same time be totally honest about what we think is not structured correctly, what we think really puts the project at risk, and hopefully that plays some small part in maybe moving us in a better direction.
Oren, Trump can always change. He could do something different tomorrow. He could, we could be having a completely different discussion next week. God only knows. But if these particular tariffs move forward and stay in place and are not matched with any commensurate industrial policy or support for Americans and American businesses who are going to be facing massive fallout over this, do you think that these tariffs will do more harm than good in your estimation?
I think the short-term costs have the potential to be pretty high. I think one of the most important elements of this that we've always put into anything we argue for is that you want to see things phased in, because the kind of transformation that we're talking about takes time. And so you certainly want things to be coming into effect, as quickly as possible to create incentives that people respond to. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to impose a lot of costs faster than people can respond. And so I think that's where we're getting a lot of the unnecessary cost. And then on the flip side, and Congressman is exactly right about this, if you don't have the certainty and the permanence, you're not going to get the investment, and therefore you're not going to get the benefit. And so that's what I'm focused on, is there are costs here. I love that we potentially have leaders communicating that we accept that there will be costs for things and we think they're worth it, but you have to get that equation right, and you have to take an approach that keeps the costs as low as possible and that then delivers the benefits. Totally. And that's what I think we have to sharpen. All
right, Congressman, last word to you. 1 minute until we got to go. What do you say?
Look, building things in America has always been hard. When FDR tried it in 1933 is when he started, and he prepared the country over a decade for then what was the industrialization in World War II. And I just think we've got to be honest with the American people that just having massive tax breaks and having tariffs isn't going to magically transform us into a manufacturing superpower. What we need is an investment in the workforce. What we need is to doing hard things like the CHIPS Act. What we need is better state capacity and being able to do things faster than we did during the CHIPS Act. What we needed is federal financing, and it takes years to build. And this is not something that can just happen in one quarter. But I think what Trump is doing is appealing to this sense that we lost too much to China, we need to build, but trying to tell people he can just magically wave a wand with tariff policy and tax policy and fix it. He can't, and he's making things worse with the blanket tariffs.
Got it. Well, thank you both very much for joining us. I think people will get a lot out of it, so we appreciate it.
Thanks, gentlemen.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show, ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.